Well, good morning, everybody. Realize that if I'm not mistaken, 2 weeks from today is what day? Christmas. I'm echoing what Derek said. I guess maybe because it's living in Florida, it's so warm, it just doesn't seem like Christmas. Now, I'm not complaining, trust me. I do not miss the cold weather. But it's just a little bit different when you don't experience it as you have your entire life. You know, the book of James has been interesting for all of us. If you're a guest with us today, we're glad that you're here. We have been studying through the book of James, and it's been a wonderful study in many ways. I'd like to give a shout out to all of the people that are watching on Facebook as well. We're glad that you're with us. And thank you, Michael, for reading our passage today. You know, of all the things that we've learned so far, I think, from the book of James, and I'm sure that most of us find different things that are important. But I think probably more than anything, it is how important our individual relationships are with God first and then with each other. And I'm going to give myself a little shout out so that you can connect the dots in just a moment as I get toward the end of the lesson. I want to try to wrap it up and talk about how we're supposed to relate to everything within life relationally, and that means not directly. We think that we have direct access to the external material world, and we actually don't. We only experience the external world through our senses, as we hear or touch or see, etc. It's hard for us because we're so accustomed to living in this world and unfortunately becoming like it, that being spiritual and being spiritual minded and learning how to react and to respond relationally to God and not to the world, that it sounds odd and strange. But that's what we're supposed to do. And as you have been reading in the book of James, you know that in chapter 5, we're going to get to that section on prayer. And he makes a statement by saying that the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. And today, James is going to talk to us about our relationship to God and how he's moving us toward those things. So before we get on into chapter 4, let me take just a moment and remind you that James has been reproving these Christians for demonstrating a spirit of independence from God. Now, how would James define a spirit of independence from God? He defines it as being double-minded. And he says that that makes you unstable and adulterous. And so they had a very specific problem. They were living their lives as if God didn't exist, even though they were religious. This is why James also says or defines what it means to be faithful. And he talks about what true religion is. He has pointed out to us in the first 10 verses of chapter 4 that they had sought the world's pleasures instead of God. Second, by judging one another, they had attempted to evade the ultimate judge, which is God himself. And that's what we looked at in part last week. Now he gets to what he would call the ultimate or the final indifference, and he uncovers it for us. And it's this. They had planned their business and omitted God from their plans. So they had this business future, and they said, here's what we're going to do. And yet, God was not factored in accordingly when they made their plans. It's clear from this passage that their disregard for God is equal in substance to their first two sins. In effect, they had ignored God and thus they show as much arrogance as does the person who slanders his neighbor. So according to James, the sin of failing to come to God in prayer is one of the most common offenses a Christian commits. Now, in this final concluding section of chapter 4, James is reminding Christians that while they cannot predict the future, they must learn to face it honestly. They should not plan the future without taking God into account or to presume upon a future that they cannot control. And then to add to that, they must not presume or they must not postpone until the future what God has instructed them to do today. So what I want to do is take a look at 3 mistakes that Christians often make. And not only do we make them, but we repeat them over and over. Mistake number 1, planning the future without God. Has any of us ever been guilty of that? Well, James addresses what he considers to be a very real problem facing the church. And I already mentioned to you the problem, and it's the title of the lesson today. These Christians were living their lives as if God didn't exist. Now, I didn't say that they were living their lives without going to church, or they were living their lives without praying or giving. James defines serving God and having faith differently than how most people would define it. And he does it, as he always does, very practically. Look at verse 13 once more. Today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city. We will spend a year there. We will carry on our business and we will make money. Now, on the surface, we might think that this is an unwarranted rebuke by James. I mean, they were just making their plans, right? In fact, you might look at it and think, well, isn't there a lot of wisdom in that? Isn't that what we always do? But the problem isn't that they were making plans. In fact, throughout the Scripture, the Bible affirms the wisdom of thinking ahead or planning. For instance, in Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 18, he writes, prepare plans by consultation. In chapter 21, verse 5, the plans of the diligent lead surely to advantage, but everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty. But don't miss this. The problem was not their planning. The problem was in their posture. Their problem was not that they wanted to do business in a particular city and make profit. No, the problem was that they failed to profoundly consider God and what God's will was. See, this is the most important thing for us. We need to know what God's will is. We substitute human intelligence, our experience in the world, for having faith in God or living by faith. See, the problem was that even though they had professed faith, they were still living multiple parts of their lives as if God didn't exist. So let me introduce to you a term I want you to wrestle with. Practical atheism. Practical atheism is when you believe in God, but you have yet to connect that belief to certain behaviors and actions. And this is what these Jewish Christians were doing. The problem was that their faith wasn't large enough in scope. So I want to suggest that the same thing that was happening to them, which is happening to us, is a predominant part of our lives, and I want to go so far as to showing you where and how. Isn't it true that most of us go about our daily lives as if God didn't exist? You might say, dude, no, that's just not true. I believe in God, and I have trusted Him for my salvation. Listen, I'm not asking you if you believe in God. I'm asking you, has your belief transformed the way you live? Has your belief been connected to the rest of your life? Listen, our culture has placed a high value on independence. It promotes the lie that we're in control of our own destiny, often conveying the idea, if it's going to be, it's up to me. So although many Christians profess faith and go to church, they rarely consider profoundly God's will when it comes to things like, who am I going to marry? Where should I prepare for the rest of my life, especially in terms of a job? What career should I choose? Should I go to college? Should I go to trade school? Should I become an apprentice? Where am I to live? How am I supposed to invest my time, my gifts, and my money? I think about this sometimes just and how it pertains to our daily routines. Many of us have morning routines. We get up in the mornings and we either read our Bibles or we read out of a devotional book and we spend time in prayer. And then the day starts. And as we go through the day, we get busy and we're so focused on getting through our to-do list. Then you get home, take the kids to ball practice, inhale dinner, help with the homework, and before you know it, you're half asleep on the couch while trying to get through your favorite TV show without having thought much about God since early that morning. Now, James, not Dane, not I, James would say, in effect, that's a form of practical atheism. Now, I want you to sit under the weight of this with me. What James is bringing to light is much more than a problem of sin. It is a sin of the most grievous magnitude. James says, you do not, under any circumstances, plan your future without God. Period. Mistake number 2, presuming to know the future. Now, they fail to comprehend, first, the uncertainty of life. Church, let me ask you, how uncertain is life? It is the absolute most uncertain thing in our existence. We don't know what's going to happen when we leave the building today. We don't have the foggiest idea what may happen tomorrow. And yet we exude the pride that we know, and then we exert our will upon our world to get what we want. That's why this is such a sin of great magnitude. He says in terms of the uncertainty in verse 14, why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. And second, they fail to comprehend the brevity of life. What is your life? Then he gives us a metaphor. You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Did you know that the Bible gives at least 18 metaphors to express the brevity and uncertainty of life? Let's just look at 2 together. The first is in 1 Chronicles 29:15. Our days on earth are like a shadow. Job 7:7. Remember, O God, that my life is but a breath. I mention this story a lot because it has just so many ways to apply it. Remember when Jesus tells a story about a wealthy farmer who perceived that he could look into the future. And he decided that he needed to build bigger barns so that he would be able to become even wealthier. And his ultimate goal was a leisurely retirement. And yet, Jesus says this in Luke chapter 12 and verse 19. And I'll say to myself, You have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Now, in the parable, the man is called a fool. The Greek word fool is the word from which we get the word moron or moronic. And what that means is they don't correspond. What you believe does not correspond to reality. So when one thinks that way, one then is considered to be a fool. Well, he was a fool not because he was planning the future, but because he thought that he was in control of it. On the very night when he had so carefully laid out his plans, he died and became the fulfillment of the Old Testament proverb. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. James says, secondly, you should not under any circumstances presume to know the future. That is a grievous sin. Mistake number 3. You see how this is a rolling ball. Postponing what should be done today. Now here's why this is important. To work and plan and prepare without profoundly considering God means, according to James, that you have forgotten God. So what does it mean to profoundly consider God? Well, another way to put it would be to pray. And not just to mouth the words or go through the motion of prayer, having decided already what you want to do, how you're going to do it, and then want to get God's blessing on top of it. It doesn't work that way. God knows what experimental praying is. He can tell the difference between that and what is true prayer and true dependence. So when we think about defining what it means to profoundly consider God, it means living by faith, which means not living by sight, which means not living based on or not leaning on your own understanding. In Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 3, it says that faith is a way of knowing. It is a way of knowing that is not dependent upon human intelligence, observation, pattern recognition, or perceived regularities. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible. You see the difference? He says that faith is spirit-based, not sense-based. So when he says, by faith we understand, he's talking about something completely different. And that is what is supposed to make us completely different. When Abraham was told that he was supposed to sacrifice his son, he operated on the basis of faith, and he reasoned within his own mind that God was going to resurrect his son from the dead after having slit his throat and burned the meat off of his bones. This didn't come from his experience. This came because he received a promise in a string of words. And reality only existed in a string of words that were connected to the Almighty. And on the basis of that relationship between him and God, based upon this set of words in this world situation, he said to himself, there is no way that the Almighty is going to lie to me. And that means there's no way that I can operate naturally. I have to be non-natural, and that's the definition of faith. And because he believed that, it says that God reckoned his faith as righteousness. So the question James has for us, among other things, is this. Can you conceive of relating to the world situation by faith and not by sight? And again, here's why this is important. If you don't live by faith in the person of God daily, you've forgotten him. And it can only mean one thing. And this is James's foundational point. You have put yourself in the place of God. So let me say it another way. To not live in constant submission to God, you put yourself in place of God. What does the Bible call that? Idolatry. See, ultimately it means that you believe that you know what's best and what the future holds. And here's the point. You've assumed that you are all-knowing, that you are omniscient. And the underlying issue is the fundamental belief that you know what's best for your life apart from God. So James then blatantly and bluntly points out just how ridiculous this thinking is. That's why he says in the last part of verse 14, you do not even know what tomorrow will bring. And yet we assume that we do. Even for a moment, James says, that is the height of arrogance. Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 8 is one of the more well-known verses of the Bible, but the point is made. He says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. If we could just see that God's ways are so much greater than ours, and that we're never going to understand the way He works. If we could just get to that point, we could pull our strong, sweaty hands off of the future and let God have it. Imagine the blessings that we could have if we would do that. You see, not only does this assume that you know what the future holds, but it assumes that you're actually in control of the future. So when you live as if you knew the future, you assume God's omniscience. But when you live as if you controlled your future, you assume that you're all-powerful or omnipotent. So James helps us get a little perspective here in view of our lives in terms of eternity. And that's why he says, what is your life? I mean, seriously. You're a mist that appears here for just a time, and then it just vanishes. Look at yourself in the mirror. Do you understand that you are not God? That you do not have that capacity? But God is willing to work on your behalf if you will just not live independently, thinking that you can do it. See, in the context of all eternity, our lives are just what? A blip. But according to James, this does not mean that our lives don't have meaning or that they don't account for anything, but it does mean that we derive our meaning from His life and not our own. Our lives matter. This brief moment matters. Both matter because we are created to worship and have been given the opportunity to proclaim the greatness of God who brought us out of darkness into His marvelous light, so that people far from God can be brought near and find the very relationship and purpose for which they were created. James clearly shows us just how sinful it is to live as though God didn't exist. So let's take just a moment to see what this produces in us. Do any of us ever worry? Do you ever go through times where you experience anxiety? If I ask you to raise your hand, you, like me, would probably raise both of them, maybe and jump up and down. Because we do. Anxiety, fear, uncertainty is commonplace among all of us. But when we live this way, we worry. And Jesus says we really don't have to worry. But worry happens when we do not go, when things don't go as we think they should go. It causes all of this. Now, you see what I mean? How are things supposed to go? I have this vision in my mind. All I have to do is close my eyes, and I can see this vision of how I think my health should go, my money should go, my relationships should go, all of it. And when things don't begin to go that way, or they begin to become imbalanced, I begin to worry and to have fear. And ultimately, I can even begin to doubt God if things get really bad. See, worry is a frustrated aspiration to omniscience. Worry is saying, I know and I am concerned, and God won't get it right. If I want it to be right, I have to do it. And so we convince ourselves that we know these things, but we're not convinced that God knows. So what do? We worry. And as the psalmist would say, we go through life eating the bread of anxious toil. According to James, using our definition today, he would say that worry is a byproduct of practical atheism. In effect, it is putting yourself in the place of God. And it leads to all sorts of problems. And we know all about them. Heart problems, intestinal problems, loss of sleep. But Jesus says that we were not designed to bear the weight of the universe. We were never meant to put it on our shoulders and to carry it. And if you could picture it this way, I all the time do it this way. When I start worrying and I start getting afraid, I do this. Because it teaches me I'm carrying the load. The load's right here. If I will keep my head up, it reminds me to remember God. To remember that I'm not God and I don't have to carry the weight. It's foolish, it's moronic to carry the weight. And I'm exhibiting this spirit of independence, thinking that I can live because I'm smart enough, because I've figured this world out. I can make plans and I can say to myself, well, I should go to such and such place. I should carry on this type of business and I can make this type of profit. As you know, it's a metaphor. I don't think James is suggesting that we literally walk around saying, if the Lord wills, with every conversation. That would be a little weird, right? What James is encouraging, however, is a heart posture that has God at the forefront of everything that you do. And that means submitting your intelligence, the way you think, to the Word of God, to the will of God, and to the power of God, and living by faith in the person of God. It is, in other words, completely accepting that everything is to be understood relationally. We relate to the Word of God, and God relates directly to the world situation on our behalf. That's why Jesus said, seek first the kingdom and its righteousness, and everything that you need for life and godliness, I will provide for you non-naturally. In the absence of spirit, in the absence of physical and natural causation, because of your relationship to me, I will provide manna. Water will flow from the rock. You will have what you need because you will always remember that I am the King of Kings and I am the Lord of Lords. And that's why he calls out to us. And he says, come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden. And what will he do? I will give you rest. Is there anybody here that needs rest? If you do, Jesus is your answer. Living your life on the basis of faith is your answer. There is none other. If you've not lived this way, and you want to, and you need help, don't go today without seeking help. There'll be an elder, at least one down here with me, and there'll be one or two in the back. Or if you need to come to Jesus today, if you need to make anything known, and we can help you, would you please make those requests known right now as we all stand and sing?